Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. The war is now finally over. It was not a difficult battle to win, though there were some financial losses and many men were killed. Not any significantly important person was lost, just some injuries here and there which will heal in some days at most. The Seven Kingdoms, weary of endless wars and rebellion, are at peace for now. But the losses and scars of these wars and battles are lingering in the hearts of warriors and the normal people alike. Just like the last time when King Robert Baratheon first rebelled. And the king, as always, is gulping his favorite wine to forget all these events. The Red Keep had not been so noisy and filled with almost all the high-ranking officials and almost all the lords of the Seven Kingdoms present here at the same time. 6 to be honest, the great hall thundered. With the clash of voices and the sound footsteps, some rushed while others strolling around. Thick carpets have been spread layers over layers, to hide the stains of ale and grease. The painted ceilings that glowed from the light of thousands of torches gilded saints and dragons dancing on them, and below in the chaos loud music was making its showdown, flutes, fiddles and drums making their noise. Servants scattered all over, serving many dishes, desserts and drinks, baked breads, roasted peacocks, and many more animals spreading their mouth-watering aroma. Barrels of Arbor Gold and Dornish Red had been cracked open, their contents poured freely into every flagon thrust forward. But the laughter of the people overtook all these things. The air was thick, hot, smoky, and pungent with roast meat and spilled wine. Even the banners of House Baratheon that hung from the high beams seemed drunk, swaying lazily in the torchlight. At the dais upon the high table sat the king himself. Robert Baratheon, broad as a bear, his black beard frothing with foam, his great hands clutched around a cup that never stayed full for long. Sitting along his side was his queen Cersei Lannister, almost half hidden in the shadows of his bulk. One of the top beauties of the Seven Kingdoms, her golden hair bright as the lion of her house, her green eyes bright but cold, as though carved from polished glass. She smiled but only slightly, and rarely, and it was never for Robert's wandering gaze or hand. If someone really carefully paid attention to her, they would see her smile directed at another man around them. But even if someone noticed it, they would not have any doubt, because the man was her dear twin brother, Jaime Lannister. He is Cersei's twin brother, born shortly after her. Their bond is central to the story, marked by their shared childhood and complex relationship. To King Robert's left side sat his right-hand man, who is far less merry. His name is Lord Eddard Stark, also known as the Ned Stark. He is the Lord of Winterfell. Even here, in this cozy atmosphere, his face bore the expression of the North. His long features, grim and lined, gave little away. He drank sparingly, ate little, and kept his gray eyes steady on his cup or the shadows. Where Robert laughed and bellowed, Ned sat silent, like stone among waves. His thoughts did not linger on feasts. They drifted far away, to cold snowfields and gray stone walls, to a hall much smaller, but far dearer, the great hall of Winterfell. A place where his beloved wife and his children are waiting for his safe return, where his people are praying for his life. He was thinking about his children. Robb, who is near adulthood every passing day, he is no longer a boy playing with the wooden swords. Sansa's beautiful daughter with her bright hair and brighter dreams. Arya, who is very wild and as restless as the wind, climbing where she should not, laughing when she should be still. Brienne, who had been a babe in swaddling when Ned had ridden south to war, who would be walking, perhaps even running by now. And the child in Catelyn's womb, when he had left for the war. He prayed for the baby to be born safely. And Jon. Always Jon. The bastard's name was a stone in his chest. Jon Snow was as much Ned's son as Robb, as much his blood as any child of Winterfell. Yet he bore the mark of bastardy as openly as a scar carved across his name. Catelyn's eyes turned cold when they fell on the boy. Her voice, which could be gentle with their true-born children, grew brittle with him. Winterfell, for all its hearts, had little warmth for bastards. Ned's hand curled around his cup as the hall erupted in another roar of laughter. A booming voice had risen above the din. 7 of them, bellowed Thoros of Myr, pounding a greasy fist upon the table. 7 great ironborn with axes long as masts, and me with naught but flame between us. The priest's bald crown shone in the torchlight, sweat and wine glistening alike. His cheeks flushed red as his robes, which even now bore stains of grease and ash. A portly man, no knight in shining armor, but none could deny the fire he carried into battle. On Pike's walls, Thoros had charged with a flaming sword wrapped in oil-soaked cloth, and men had fallen before him as though before some vengeful god. To the iron-born, steeped in salt and drowned gods, fire had been terror itself. Robert had laughed back then, as he laughed now, slapping the table, until all the cups spilled. By the gods, Merman, I near pissed myself when I saw you blazing through their ranks. A priest, heh. The only priest worth a damn is one that can fight. Serena Lannister lounged half-reclined a few seats down, his golden hair gleaming in the candlelight, his smile quick and cutting. 7, you say? But an hour ago, you said it was 5. Thoros wagged his flagon like a scolding finger. You lions hear poorly. 5, 7, 10. What matters the number? Fire unmans all men, even drowned gods. The storm lords around him cheered, beating their cups together, but Ned saw the northerners gathered at the far end of the hall exchange uneasy glances. Fire and gods, two things, the north neither trusted nor welcomed. Robert reached across and clapped Thoros, so hard the man nearly toppled into his trencher. Neither Meerman, you'll be the death of yourself. Yet. But give me 1 Thoros over 10 silk-cloaked knights. And 20 septons besides. The hall roared again. Renly Baratheon, barely more than a youth, his face still smooth, clapped and laughed with the rest, delight shining in his eyes. Even dour Stannis allowed himself the smallest twitch of a lip, though whether in amusement or irritation, none could tell. Ned alone did not smile. He studied Thoros with cool eyes, a drunkard, a braggart, a priest who spent more time in brothels than in septas. Yet there was something in the way the firelight caught his gaze. The strange fever in it that made Ned uneasy. He thought of Jon again. Solemn, quiet, eyes gray as winter. So unlike the flame that danced in Thoros' glance. The feast continued until the very late night. Animal bones littered in the hall on tables and on floor. Wine dropped and flowed like a river. Songs of knights played until the end, and ladies wearing fancy clothes and jewelries whispered among each other. Robert drank enough to quench his thirst, due to war and grief of the losses, as well as the grief of his family, more of Jon his lovely son. Ned endured all of this sitting there silently watching all the rest, enjoying even though they won a great victory. Although not as great as when he last fought in Robert's rebellion, but great nonetheless. But he was not happy as truly from inside. He wanted to rush out from here and return home to his family, to his children, until the king suddenly leaned across him, his breath smelling of wine and meat. Ned, Robert slurred, blue eyes gleaming. I've been thinking. Oh, that is very dangerous. You are fine by not thinking anything, dear brother, muttered Stannis, who was never the one to waste his words. While Renly laughed aloud, delighted by his brother's barbs. Robert ignored both of his brothers and their antics, and addresses Ned further. I want to talk about your son. What was his name? Yeah, that boy Jon Snow. Why are you leaving him in the cold snow of Winterfell for freezing his guts among those people who are cold-hearted to him, when he can become a man here in King's Landing? Send him south. Let him become a squire. As if he suddenly remembered something, he slapped the table hard enough to shake everything on it before saying, why not let him squire Thoros? You know Thoros enough. Even though he is a drunkard and has many bad habits. But he is a very brave person, and you have seen it with your own eyes. Let your wolf pup learn fire and drink together. He'll be wasted there in the cold. Neddy's jaw tightened, though his face remained stone. After some thinking about his son's safety from these people present, he said, Jon is well where he is. Cersei turned her green eyes upon him, sharp as poisoned daggers. Does the North breed so many children that even its bastards must be offered to the court? She asked, her voice honeyed silk, each word a barb, or is it only that Lord Stark finds them inconvenient? The words pierced deeper than steel, while Ned said nothing and just endured silently. What could he even say when it was his fault for telling everyone that Jon is a bastard? He could not think of any other way to keep his precious child safe at that time. Robert laughed all the louder. Don't scowl so, Ned. Better here than under Cats's frosty glare, eh? The boy will thank you for it. But Ned's heart twisted. He thought of Jon alone in Winterfell's yard, Catelyn's eyes cold upon him. Perhaps Robert's drunken jest carried truth enough. Then Thoros, wine-soaked and red-faced, lifted his head. His gaze did not wander, drunkenly as before, but fixed upon the nearest fire source. The flames leapt, casting shadows that danced like spirits upon the walls, his eyes suddenly more focused than ever before. The laughter stilled. Even Robert lowered his cup. "A boy of wolf's blood," Thoros murmured, eyes alight with flame. "A boy wreathed in fire. The Lord of Light shows me such a one. He is not meant for snow alone." A chill, colder than any northern winter, ran down Ned's spine. Robert blinked, then let out a booming laugh to break the silence. "Hi! Hear that, Ned? Even the Red Priest sees your pup's fate in fire. Send him south, let Thoros make a squire of him. Wolf and fire, eh? By the gods, it's too perfect." The lords roared with him, eager to cast off the weight of prophecy and laughter. Cups clashed, songs resumed, and Thoros, as if waking from a trance, reached again for his wine, blinking in confusion at the words he had spoken. But Ned Stark sat stiff, staring into his cup as if looking into a well carved of snow. He saw not wine, but Jon's pale face looking back at him. Lyanna's face too, in his memory, her dark eyes brimming with sorrow. The feast lasted on long, until the very late night. Tired at last, Robert stumbled away, his arm cast about a reluctant queen. Thoros slumped forward, snoring into the grease of the table. The lords departed by ones and twos, until only embers remained in the hearth. The music had died, the torches guttered low. He sat alone at the high table, his hand around a cup gone cold. The embers hissed and cracked, sparks rising like fleeting stars. The words clung to him, heavy as chains. Ned sat there motionless, thinking about Lyanna and her fate, and even about the fate of her still-living son. A boy of wolf's blood, wreathed in flame. Perhaps it had been drunken folly, perhaps, but the words still lingered, sharp as iron on the tongue. Was Jon's path already chosen? Lord Eddard Stark has arrived in Winterfell, after many days of journey, where his wife and his children along with his people had come to welcome him and his companions on the gate of Winterfell. Thoros has also came along for a visit and to see Jon, who is to be his squire. Although I've not completely made up my mind to send Jon away from Winterfell, which is his home, and where I can completely ensure the safety of his life. But this safety can only be from life threats, but sometimes other threats are more crucial to one. So I am thinking it through to send him with Thoros, and maybe he'll be able to find his own way in this journey. I have to talk to him about this when I find a time suitable enough. Lord Eddard Stark sat alone at the high table. His hands rested folded before him, his head bowed as if in prayer, though no words passed his lips. In the stillness he wrestled not with enemies of flesh and steel, but with himself. A choice lay before him, and though he was a man who rarely doubted his path, this choice tore at him like a blade drawn across his heart. The great hall of Winterfell was quiet, silent. The laughter of King Robert's feast had faded into Ned's memory. Fires is burning low in the massive hearths, their embers glowing like the last blood-red light of sunset, and the smell of roasted animals clung stubbornly to the air. Where the night before had been alive with bawdy songs, roaring laughter, and the thump of goblets upon oaken tables, now there was only silence, thick and heavy, as if the very stones of Winterfell remembered the noise and were still recovering from it. Jon Snow. The boy had always been apart, though never by his own doing. Where Robb laughed easily, Jon lingered in silence. Where Arya rushed into mischief, Jon followed with quiet eyes, rarely joining but never condemning. His laughter came seldom, and when it did, it was fleeting, as if joy were something he had to borrow from others rather than own. Even in play, a shadow clung to him. Catelyn saw it too. No, more than saw, she felt it like a thorn lodged deep. Her gaze, warm enough for her true-born children, turned cold whenever it fell on Jon. The stain of bastardy was an invisible cloak he wore every moment of his life. Ned loved him still, as fiercely as if he had been born of Catelyn's body, yet love was not always enough to shield a child from the cruel looks of others, nor from the frost in his lady's eyes. He knew Jon felt it, he knew it cut him. And then came Thoros of Myr, with his wine-reddened cheeks and his half-drunken, half-prophetic words. The boy has a look in him, Ned. Snow and fire, like two gods warring in one body. Let me take him as my squire. Better that than leaving him here, a ghost in your own hall. Robert had roared with laughter at that, demanding more wine and jesting about wolf pups learning fire and drink. But Ned had not laughed. The words had struck too close, as sharp as a dagger's edge. He pushed himself up from the high table, the weight of his choice pressing on his shoulders heavier than plate armor. He crossed the hall, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness, and stepped out into the crisp morning air of the yard. The chill stung his face, bracing after the heat of the hall. There he found Robb and Jon with wooden swords in hand, sparring under the watchful eye of Ser Roderick Castle. The boys were near of an age, their movements quick and eager. Robb lunged with all the boldness of a true-born heir, swinging wide, grinning even as he stumbled. Jon's style was different, measured, cautious, precise. He yielded ground to Robb's fury, then slipped aside, waiting for an opening. Steel clattered on wood as they clashed, sweat already beading on their brows despite the cold. Enough, Ser Roderick barked at last, his thick mustache bristling as he strode between them. You'll wear yourselves to bones before breakfast. Both boys dropped their swords, panting, and then laughed, real laughter, loud and bright, echoing across the yard. For that moment, they were simply children, brothers in all but name. Ned's heart twisted at the sight. They should grow together side by side, as they had been born to, but he knew they could not. Shadows lengthened with time, and Jon's shadow grew heaviest in Catelyn's eyes. You asked for me, father. Ned's breath caught at the word. Jon had always called him father, though Ned had never answered with son. That truth stood between them like a wall, neither could climb. Aye, Jon, Ned said softly. He gestured to the chair opposite. Sit with me. Jon obeyed, perching stiffly on the edge of the chair as though it were a throne too grand for him. His hands clenched in his lap, his shoulders tense, bracing for words that might wound. Ned studied him, memorizing every line of his face. The boy he had raised, the boy he could never truly claim. Jon blinked, startled by the question. He is strange, he admitted. He drinks too much. He laughs too loud. He sets swords on fire. A small, fleeting smile ghosted his lips. But he spoke to me kindly, at supper. He didn't look at me as if I were less. Ned's throat tightened. Less. That was what Jon felt. What Winterfell had made him feel. He is asked to take you as his squire, Ned said, keeping his voice steady. For a heartbeat, Jon's face lit with a hope so fierce it nearly undid Ned. His eyes shone, wide and eager. A glimpse of the boy he might have been without the weight of bastardy. But then the light dimmed, his shoulders slumping. And you would send me away, he whispered. Ned closed his eyes. Yes. Because here your mother cannot bear to look at you. Because here the whispers will smother you. Because here my silence is killing you. Instead, he said, I would not send you away. Jon, I would give you a chance. The world is larger than these walls. You would see it, live it. You would not be bound by the whispers here in Winterfell. Jon's jaw tightened, stubborn as any Stark. And what of Robb? Arya? Bran? They are my kin. They will always be your kin, Ned answered gently. But you are more than Winterfell's bastard. You must be. I feel it, though I cannot tell you why. Jon looked at him, searching his face for some hidden truth. Before he could speak again, the solar door banged open. Thoros of Myr strode in, reeking of wine even in the morning. His red robe was half undone, a greasy stain down the front, his bald crown gleaming with sweat. Ah, Lord Stark. Still brooding, I see, he boomed, his voice filling the chamber. Then his gaze fell on Jon and his grin widened. And here's the boy, bright-eyed and sharp-jawed. Well, for a Stark. He clapped his hands together. Tell me, lad, can you drink a flagon without falling under the table? No? We'll teach you. Can you ride? Can you laugh? Can you set a sword aflame and scare the piss out of your enemies? Jon stared at him, torn between horror and fascination. Ned almost smiled despite himself. The man was absurd, crude, half-mad, and yet strangely alive, like a torch burning too hot to hold. You see, Ned? Thoros crowed. He's half in shadow already. Keep him here, and he'll brood himself into stone. Give him to me, and I'll make him a man. Mayhap even a knight of fire. With that, Thoros swept out as loudly as he had entered, humming a bawdy tune. Silence fell in his wake. Jon's gray eyes turned back to Ned. Searching, desperate. "Do you wish me gone, father?" The words struck like a sword to the gut. Ned longed to say no, longed to claim him, to keep him close, to tell him the truth that burned in his chest, that Jon was not a mistake, but the last, most precious piece of Lyanna. But the promise he had made all those years ago bound his tongue tighter than chains. At last he reached out, resting a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I wish you safe," he said hoarsely. "I wish you strong. That is all I can say." Jon nodded, but the sadness in his eyes lingered. He bowed his head, and in that moment, Ned Stark felt the full weight of his burden. Not only a promise to a dying sister, but the choice that might shape the fate of all the realms of men. That night, when the castle slept, Ned descended into the crypts. He walked the long hall of stone kings and queens, past faces carved in eternal watchfulness, until he reached the statue of his sister. Lyanna's likeness sat beneath her weeping garland of stone roses, her face forever young and sorrowful. There in the chill dark, Ned whispered into the silence, "Forgive me, little sister. I give him to the fire, because the snow cannot hold him." The words vanished into the still air, but the wind outside the crypts rose, howling through Winterfell's towers like a wolf in mourning. It carried with it a promise of loss, and of destiny yet to come. Jon's POV, father's words struck me harder than Robb's sword ever could. Thoros of Myr, a squire, a chance to become more than the bastard who lingers in the shadows. For one heartbeat, I let myself hope. I saw myself on a horse, sword in hand, a man others might look at without pity. But then came the weight of it. Leaving Robb, Arya, little Bran, leaving Winterfell, the only home I've ever known, even if its halls are colder for me than for the rest. Lady Catelyn will not miss me, I know that, but Robb will, and I will miss him. Gods help me, and Arya with her wild ways, who will laugh at her jests when I am gone. When father told me it was not banishment, but a gift, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he saw something in me, something more. Yet I could see it in his eyes too, a sorrow he would not speak of. Now, as I stand at the gates with my pack heavy on my back, the wind biting my face, I tell myself this is my chance. My chance to be someone. Still, my heart feels split in two, half clinging to the stones of Winterfell, half reaching for a fire I do not yet understand. Yet I am confused about the dream I saw, where someone who looked just like me, or maybe it was myself, was walking through a fire that looked unnatural, but he was all okay, like he was walking on a playground. I want to forget this weird dream, but every time I close my eyes this scene repeats itself. The dawn over Winterfell was pale and cold, a thin mist curling around the towers and battlements like ghostly figures reluctant to let go. The courtyard, usually filled with the sounds of stable boys, barking hounds, and sparring of steel swords, had taken on a strange hush that morning, as if even the walls of the castle understood what was to come. Jon Snow lingered in the yard longer than it was necessary, tightening the strap of his cloak, adjusting the sword scabbard at his hip, though everything had already been checked twice the night before. He was restless. No, more than restless. He was nervous and also excited for his future. The thought that he was leaving Winterfell, the only home he had ever known, sent 100 different feelings racing through him, each crashing against the other like waves on stone. Excitement warred with dread, pride with sorrow. He caught Robb's eye across the yard. His half-brother, no, his almost true brother, for they had been raised so, was standing tall with unspoken pride. Though Jon knew him well enough to see the stiffness in his stance, Robb's mouth quirked into a smile, but it was a smile that carried more weight than laughter. "Know that you'll write to me every time you get a chance," Robb said when Jon came to him, voice firm as he was though commanding for it. "Certainly I will," Jon promised, "and when you're Warden of the North someday when you are of age, I'll return here and ride at your side." Robb's smile warmed, and for a moment the sadness that had lingered in his eyes gave way to something brighter. "You'd better keep your promise," he said, "or else I'll march south myself to drag you home, if I have to." Jon chuckled, but his throat tightened. He clasped Robb's forearm the way soldiers did, a firm grip that masked trembling fingers, and for a moment they stood like men grown, not the boys they were on the cusp of leaving childhood. From behind, Arya darted forward, her figure small and fierce, eyes red from crying, though she tried to hide it with a scowl, but failing to do so. She flung herself against Jon, nearly knocking him back. "Please take me with you, Jon," she demanded. "I'll fight too. Now I can hold a sword, and I won't hold you back." Jon laughed when he heard this, though the sound cracked. He knelt to her level, brushing a tangle of brown hair out of her eyes. "Not yet, precious little wolf. Someone has to stay here and keep Robb on his toes, while I'm gone." Arya's lip trembled. "I don't want you to go." He kissed her brow. "I'll be back before you know it, and when I return, I'll expect you to have beaten half of the boys in the yard with a stick sword." She sniffled, and though she nodded fiercely, Jon felt the dampness of her tears against his collar before she pulled away. Sansa came next, graceful and careful, as always. Though her cheeks were flushed, she held something in her hands, a piece of cloth folded neatly. "I made this for you," she said, avoiding his eyes. Jon took it gently, unfolding the square to find a simple but carefully stitched dire wolf in gray thread. It was uneven in places, the lines of the stitches wandering here and there, but Jon knew the hours it must have taken. "It's wonderful," he said softly, his voice rougher than he wished. Sansa finally met his eyes then, hers shining, and for the briefest moment, Jon thought he saw something in them, a tenderness that went beyond sisterly care. But the moment passed, and she dropped her gaze, murmuring, "For luck, so you don't forget Winterfell." "As if I ever could," Jon replied. Bran toddled up with Rickon in tow, both too young to truly grasp what was happening. Bran puffed out his chest, declaring, "When you come back, I'll be taller than you." Jon grinned. "I look forward to it, but don't grow too tall, or I'll mistake you for a giant." Rickon, barely steady on his legs, clung to Jon's cloak and mumbled nonsense words, but his small hand was warm, and Jon's heart clenched at the thought of leaving them behind. Yet not every farewell was warm. Lady Catelyn stood by the steps, her face carved from ice. She had said little since Thoros' suggestion the night before, but Jon felt the weight of her gaze now. It was not cruelty. No, she had never struck him, never raised her voice in fury, but it was a coldness sharper than steel, the reminder that he was not truly hers, not truly Stark. "Lady Catelyn," Jon said carefully, bowing his head. She inclined hers in return, her words precise, clipped. "May the Seven watch over you, wherever this road takes you." It was a blessing, but there was no warmth in it. Jon nodded, throat tight, and moved on. And then came Thoros of Myr. The Red Priest stumbled into the yard, his cloak flapping, his beard wild, and his breath thick with the smell of wine. He carried a skin under one arm and a torch under the other, though it was broad daylight. His horse, a stout brown gelding, shifted nervously as Thoros tried to mount, nearly unseating him before he even got a foot in the stirrup. "Easy, beast," Thoros bellowed, glaring at the horse, as though it had offended his honor. "I've ridden war horses into the teeth of Greyjoy raiders. Don't think you'll throw me, you flea-bitten mule." Jon couldn't help but smile despite himself. The yard, heavy with tension, eased just a little. "Ready, boy?" Thoros asked Jon when he finally managed to heave himself onto the horse, cloak tangled around his legs. "Or do you need to kiss every stone in the yard farewell first?" "I'm ready," Jon said, though his heart whispered otherwise. And then came the moment he dreaded most, saying goodbye to his father. Jon unwrapped it carefully, breath-catching. A sword, smaller than ice, but finely made. The steel bright, the hilt wrapped in dark leather. "This belonged to my father's brother Benjen, when he was a boy," Ned said quietly. "It is yours now." Jon swallowed hard. "Thank you, father." Ned rested a hand on his shoulder, heavy with meaning. "Dawn, the road you are about to take will not be easy. You will see things that test your strength, your honor, your very soul. Remember who you are. Remember Winterfell." "I will, father," Jon whispered, his chest tight. For a moment, Ned's face softened, and it seemed as though he would say more. His lips parted, his eyes shadowed with a secret, but then he closed them briefly and only drew Jon into a swift embrace. "Go," Ned said firmly, though his voice was thick. "Before I change my mind." Jon mounted his horse, clutching the stitched token from Sansa in one hand and the sword from his father at his hip. He looked back once, seeing his family gathered, Robb standing tall, Arya waving fiercely, Sansa with her hands clasped tight, Bran and Rickon bouncing on their toes, and Catelyn still and silent. The sight burned into his heart. Then he turned, urging his horse forward, and followed Thoros of Myr and the king's retinue out into the wide world. The road stretched before him, uncertain and vast, and though sorrow weighed heavy, a strange thrill stirred within Jon Snow. For the first time in his life, he was not merely a bastard in the shadows of Winterfell. He was a squire, a traveler, perhaps even something more. Behind him, the gates closed with a groan that echoed like finality. Ahead, the unknown awaited. And somewhere in the echo of Thoros' drunken laughter and Ned Stark's unspoken words, destiny whispered Jon's name. Thoros POV. Thoros had laughed along with Robert's bawdy jest at first, the ale spilling from his cup as the king roared about Stark's bastard pup fit only for a kennel. Yet the laughter had frozen in his throat when the name was spoken aloud. Jon Snow. It struck him strangely, as if the very syllables carried weight. That night, long after the feast's clamor died and Robert snored like a war horn, Thoros dreamed in fire. He saw a boy with the look of the wolf standing amidst a storm of ash and embers, his sword blazing brighter than Thoros' own tricks, brighter even than the sun. He woke shivering, sweat pouring despite the cool air of dawn, and for once in many years he did not doubt that Rissalor had whispered to him. So when Robert pressed the matter as drunken sport, Thoros, half grinning, half afraid, accepted. A squire, yes, let the wolf's bastard serve him. It was the perfect jest to the lords, but in Thoros' heart it was obedience to something far greater. He rode north with Eddard Stark, the sober, stern lord who seemed carved from ice itself, and when at last they reached Winterfell and Thoros laid his eyes upon the boy, he nearly dropped his wine. The same face, the same shadow of fire in the snow. The boy looked no more than any other child, dark-haired, solemn, yet the priest's heart thumped like a drum. The Lord of Light had not played him false. This was the one, whether for salvation or ruin, Thoros dared not guess. He just swore to show the kid the right path, when needed, and maybe train him for what was to come ahead. And so, when they departed Winterfell together, Thoros masked his unease with laughter and jests, but behind every word burned a single thought. He was riding south with the boy of his vision, and the fire would test them both before the end. Rob's POV. Today was the day Jon was going to leave. Some part of me wanted to stop my brother from leaving, yet I knew if he stayed here, he won't ever be happy. Here people will only remind him of his bastardy. They will only hate him, and there's nothing I can do. I can't even give the love he deserves as a brother, even if a half one, because people won't accept a bastard so close to the heir of Winterfell. It will in the end make things more difficult for Jon than they already are. So I did the best thing next. I made him promise to return one day, if it was even possible, and made him promise to write on every chance. I can only wish him best luck as I watch him leaving Winterfell on his difficult journey ahead. The world beyond Winterfell's walls was even larger than Jon had ever truly imagined. The northern woods stretched endlessly, black pine and gray-barked weirwood trees towering over the winding King's Road. Snow still clung to the shaded hollows, though it was late springtime, and the air was crisp, each breath tinged with the faint scent of green after a long frost. Jon rode his horse with his hood drawn up, the weight of his newly gifted sword at his hip, and the token of Sansa's embroidery tucked safe in his breast pocket. Every step his horse took carried him further from Winterfell and deeper into uncertainty. Leading ahead was Thoros of Myr, who rode like a man at war with his own mount. The brown gelding plodded dutifully, but Thoros swayed precariously, clutching reins in one hand and a wineskin in the other, as though either might steady him. From time to time he broke into song, a bawdy tavern tune about a sellsword and a milkmaid, his voice loud and horribly off-key. "7 bloody hells," muttered Sarah Barston Selmy, riding nearby. His white cloak fluttered, perfectly clean despite the dust of the road. Does he never fall silent? Several of the retinue chuckled, though Jon kept quiet. He watched, half in awe, half in disbelief, as Thoros tried to steer his horse with his knees, while using both hands to gesture through another verse. The horse, clearly unimpressed, veered toward the ditch until Thoros yelped and righted himself again. "Do you think he's truly even a priest?" Jon whispered to the nearest rider, who was a squire of Renly's. The boy laughed. "I don't know if he is, but the gods, it must be hard of his hearing." Jon smiled faintly, but his mind still lingered on Thoros. Here was the man whom he was sworn to squire under, a red priest who fought with fire, sang like a fool, and smelled perpetually of wine. Jon wondered if he'd made a huge mistake by agreeing for this. Or at least he tried to. Thoros had, at some point in the afternoon, fallen asleep on the top of his saddle, and had to be half carried, half dragged into the camp from there. Jon, a bit flustered but determined, tried to settle his master down on the bedroll. The man flopped over like a sack of grain, muttering about some flaming goats and a wine sweeter than Dornish girls. Jon stifled a laugh while shaking his head. When he finally sat down near the fire, exhaustion was weighing on him heavily. He found himself beside Renly, who was the youngest Baratheon. He was stirring the pot of stew with a stick, his fine cloak laid aside so the smoke would not cling to it. "You've got your work cut out for you," Renly remarked, nodding toward Thoros, who was now snoring loudly enough to startle the horses. Jon shrugged, saying, "I'll manage." Renly studied him with curiosity. "You're Lord Stark's boy, aren't you? Though not a trueborn." The words stung, though Renly hadn't meant them cruelly, or by ill intentions. Jon straightened. "But I'm still his son." Renly tilted his head, as though weighing him, then smiled faintly. A good answer, but not everyone would like it. For a time they ate in a companionable silence, but Jon's thoughts wandered elsewhere. He missed the sound of Robb's laughter, Arya's chatter, even Sansa's scolding tone when Bran knocked over her sewing basket. Here, surrounded by strangers and knights, he felt the weight of his bastardy heavier than ever. The next morning brought some spectacle. Thoros rose late in morning, bleary-eyed, but when the retinue gathered to ride, he pulled a curious thing from his saddlebags, a longsword wrapped in rags. He doused the blade in a strange, oily liquid, muttering words Jon didn't understand, then struck flint to steel. The sword burst into flame. Gasps rippled through the camp. Jon's breath was caught in his throat for a moment. The fire danced along the blade, fierce and bright, yet it did not consume the steel. Thoros swung it easily, the flames leaving trails of light in the air. "Now that," Renly exclaimed, clapping, "is something worth bringing to a tourney." Even Barristan, stern as ever, looked grudgingly impressed. Jon couldn't tear his eyes away. He thought of Winterfell's words. Winter is coming, and of how fire could drive back cold, could turn darkness to light. For the first time, a spark of pride lit within him at being Thoros' squire. "Fetch me the oil, boy," Thoros barked, nearly singeing his own hair as he flourished the blade. Jon ran to obey. Though his hands shook, he watched intently, memorizing every step, every muttered word. Something deep within him stirred, though he could not name it. By midday, however, the magic gave way to chaos. As they rode through a narrow stretch of road, flanked by woods, Thoros, determined to show off, lit his sword again. He flourished it grandly, declaring, "Behold, the fire of Ritlar, bane of darkness," and then his horse spooked. With a shriek, the gelding reared, nearly throwing him. The flaming blade swung wide, narrowly missing Renly's cloak. Horses scattered, knights cursed, and one unlucky squire dove, head first, into the mud to avoid being set aflame. "Seven hells, Thoros!" Barristan roared, fury in his voice. Thoros righted himself, singed eyebrows smoking. "Merely a demonstration," he declared. "A test of faith. The fire only seeks the worthy." Jon, though mortified, couldn't help but laugh at this too. For all of Thoros' foolishness, there was something infectious about his ridiculous resilience. Later, when things calmed down, Thoros nudged Jon. "Lesson 1, boy, never ride with fire drawn, unless you've the seat of a Braavosi water dancer, or the luck of a drunk priest." Jon grinned despite himself. "Which one do you have?" Thoros winked. "Both." That night, when the camp quieted and all the others slept, Jon found Thoros sitting alone by the dying fire. The wineskin dangled forgotten at his side, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Boy, do you also wonder if I'm a fool?" Thoros said suddenly, his voice very low. Jon hesitated and replied, "You're just different." Thoros chuckled, though it held no joy. "I, different. Do you know why I took to fire, boy? Why I run into battle with a flaming sword and with half the world laughing at me?" Jon shook his head. "Because when I was young, I thought the fire spoke to me. I thought I could bring light to darkness, burn away all the shadows, change the world." His gaze was far away, his face lit orange by the flames. But war teaches you different lessons. Fire burns, aye, but it cannot heal what's already broken. Silence stretched. Jon felt the weight in Thoros' words, heavier than wine or jest. He thought of Lady Catelyn's cold eyes, of his father's embrace that was left unfinished, of the gates of Winterfell closing behind him. Still, Thoros added, forcing a crooked smile on his face, it makes up for a good show. Jon said nothing, but that night he dreamed of fire and snow colliding, and of a direwolf wreathed in flames. 2 days later, as they passed through a village on the King's Road, Jon's path took another turn. Jon tried not to stare, but found himself glancing back more than once. She caught his eye and, to his surprise, smiled at him. It was not mocking, nor shy, but warm, as if she'd seen through the dust and travel grime to the boy beneath. His cheeks burned red. He nearly dropped Thoros' saddlebag when the priest barked for him. The girl vanished into the crowd as quickly as she'd appeared, but the memory lingered. Jon found himself thinking of her that night, though he didn't even know her name. Romance, fragile and uncertain, had flickered into his story. As the retinue pushed further south, Jon grew more accustomed to the rhythm of travel, with the ache in his legs, the constant demands of his master, the ever-changing faces of the road. Yet within him, something else stirred, a strange sense of belonging. Not with Thoros, not fully, not yet, but with the world itself. The world beyond Winterfell was vast, alive with fire and laughter, sorrow and possibility. And Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, was beginning to see himself not just as a shadow in the Stark household, but as someone who might someday carve his own path in flame and frost. After a really long journey, the group finally made it to King's Landing. The smell hit Jon before he even saw the walls. It was a mix of salt, rotting stuff, fish guts, and human waste, with smoke so thick it felt like wool. King's Landing announced itself to his nose first, a city that seemed to breathe from its belly. The King's Road wound down toward the Blackwater like a frayed ribbon, packed with carts, drovers, and beggars who shuffled aside just enough to let the royal banners pass. Above all the noise, the Red Keep loomed on Aegon's high hill, all red stone and sharp angles, its towers like spears stabbing at the sky. "Smell that?" Thoros of Myr said, pulling his horse up next to Jon. "Victory, lad, and maybe a dead whale." Jon tried not to gag. "Winterfell smells like smoke and pine. King's Landing smells like other things," Thoros replied cheerfully, raising his wineskin in a toast to the city. "Gold, grease, perfume, lies." He took a swig. "Mostly lies." They crawled through the King's Gate, jostling along. Gold cloaks lined the archway, standing too deep with their halberds held high, faces blank as the crowd pushed forward. Jon saw a bent old woman holding up a string of wooden saints to a passing knight, only to have a gold cloak smack her ear and send the trinket spinning into the gutter. The woman bent down to pick them up with shaking hands. No one stopped to help her. No one even looked. "Keep your eyes open," Thoros said quietly. "These cities have very sharp teeth." A boy darted between a wagon and a mule, reaching for Jon's purse like a snake. Jon reflexively grabbed the boy's wrist. They stared at each other for a moment. The boy's eyes dark and sullen, like dirty water, and Jon felt a sudden fierce protectiveness. The gold cloaks noticed the scuffle and moved in fast, eager. "Leave him," Jon said before he even realized he had spoken. "He's hungry." "Everyone's hungry," the nearest watchman said, yanking the boy away. The cudgel came up. Thoros' voice cut through the noise, warm as a fire but dangerous. "A kindness for the king's sake, friends. First day back and all, what would the small folk think if the brave watch beat starving kids while the banners pass?" The watchman hesitated. Thoros pulled out 2 copper coins and flashed a smile that looked a lot like a bribe. The cudgel lowered. The boy vanished into the crowd with a rat's speed, glancing back at Jon one last time, maybe in thanks or just wary. "You can't feed them all, lad," Thoros said, as they moved on, "but you can choose who you help." Jon clenched his jaw. The tug at his belt, where the boy had grabbed him, lingered. "I've never seen so many people," he finally said. "And most of them would rather not be seen," Thoros replied. "That's the trick of cities." They climbed the hill through streets that got narrower as they went up. The cries of hawkers bounced off the stone, oysters and eels, boiled leather for shoemakers, dyed silks bright enough to shame the sun. Jon watched a fishwife slap a man with a gutted mackerel for touching her wares without paying. Saw a septon blink and smile as he blessed a line of mothers holding sickly babies, and watched two men argue in 3 languages at once, before coming to blows with a fury that felt more like a show than real hatred. Civilization, he thought, unsure if the word was a compliment or a curse. At the top, around the last bend, the Red Keep opened up to swallow them. Gatehouse, Barbican, banners flapping, the king's stag ramping on gold. The courtyard was wide and bright in the sun. Stable boys ran, dogs barked, armor clinked like a pile of coins. Jon had to take a moment to catch his breath. He had known castles all his life. Winterfell's thick walls, its quiet stone, but this place looked fancy like a mask and showed its teeth beneath. "Welcome home," Thoros said dryly. "Try not to start a war before supper." They got off their horses. Jon's horse, sweaty and cranky, snapped at a boy who got too close with a curry comb. Jon calmed the animal with a gentle touch. He felt too many eyes on him and turned to see a thin man in dove-gray silk and soft slippers drifting their way. "Lord Thoros." The man's hands were steepled, and his smile never reached his eyes. "I'm relieved to see you back unburned." "Varys," Thoros said, mock serious. "Master of Whispering Slippers." "Master of Whisperers," the man corrected, nodding to Jon. "And who is this cold wind you've brought us?" "My squire," Thoros said, with a flourish that could have been charming if his sleeve didn't smell like wine. "Jon Snow." "Snow," Varys repeated gently, as if tasting the name. "A northern name. Names can be heavy things down here. Young Jon, I hope yours sits lightly." Jon bowed stiffly, trying not to look awkward. "My lord." "Not a lord," Varys said, his smile shifting like quicksilver. "Just a servant. As we all are, in our own ways." He drifted away like a puff of powdered sugar, leaving behind a faint scent of lilac and a feeling that he knew more than he let on. Thoros scratched his belly. "If you see him twice in an hour, it means he wanted you to see him. If you don't see him at all, it means he knows where you keep your secrets." "Do I have secrets?" "You're a boy?" Thoros said. "You will." They were taken to a room above a narrow gallery that overlooked the training yard. Jon dropped his stuff on the bed and went to the window like a moth to a flame. Below, boys were hacking at straw dummies, while a tough-looking master-at-arms shouted at them. A tall kid with hair bright as gold disarmed a smaller one with lazy grace, and looked up by chance, or maybe not, and met Jon's gaze. A smile flickered across the golden-haired boy's face, full of pride and polished cruelty, and then he turned away to soak up the applause of his friends. "Pretty as a coin and just as generous," Thoros said from the doorway. "Don't stare too long at lions, they learn your face." "Is he a Lannister?" Thoros waved his hand. "Close enough." They were called to the throne room at sunset. The hall swallowed sound. Even Robert Baratheon's loud laugh seemed smaller under the weight of the painted ceiling, and the iron monstrosity sprawled like a dragon at the far end. The Iron Throne was uglier than Jon had imagined. More knives than chair, metal warped and pitted, uncomfortable even to look at. Robert sat on the step below it, crown askew, goblet in hand, one leg cocked like a guy at a tavern. He looked younger than he had on the campaign, and older than he had at the feast, and when he saw Thoros, his face lit up with real joy. "Thoros, you red-handed bastard, you're alive." "I endure," Thoros said, bowing in a way that could have been graceful if he hadn't almost tripped over his own feet. Laughter rippled through the court. "And I bring you a boy brave enough to squire for me, either a fool or a hero." "Which are you, lad?" Robert asked, his eyes bright with wine and mischief. "Fool or hero?" Jon felt heat rise in his neck. "I don't know yet, your grace." The king laughed. "Honest. We'll beat that out of you. What do you see, coming up my hill? What's your first thought of my city?" Jon glanced toward the arched doors, where the last light of day spilled in like a wound. He remembered the gold cloak's cudgel, the boy's thin wrist in his hand. He remembered the septon's blessing, and the fishwife's slap. He remembered the Red Keep's sharp edges. "It is very big," Robert roared. "A diplomat already," he waved his goblet. "Make sure he eats something that hasn't been boiled in a bucket. Gods know the north gorges on snow and boiled bark." A stark face, the queen said casually. One can always tell them, even when the name tries to hide. Jon felt the words sting. Robert waved them off. Ned's boy or not, he's Thoros' problem now. Gods help the lad. Take him, priest, teach him to light swords on fire, and not his pants. If the gods wanted dignity, Thoros replied, they would have made fewer of us. They were let go before supper started, with its grim dance of petitions and jokes. Thoros led Jon out a side door, into a hallway rich with tapestries that showed histories Jon half knew and half doubted. A king with a sword shining like dawn, a dragon with 3 heads crying tears of fire, a woman crowned in stars. In the weave, glory looked simple. In the hallways it smelled of beeswax and old wool. Hungry? Thoros asked. I could eat. Good, Thoros said, brightening. Because I'm about to show you the best lemon cakes in the city, and the worst wine, and between them we'll find a truth. The truth turned out to be that King's Landing was 2 cities that rarely talked to each other. From the Red Keep, they went down a stair that felt like it dropped them into a whole new world. The Street of Sisters, where the great Sept of Baelor lifted its domes like a shining promise above a sea of people. Bells told the hour. Pigeons burst like confetti around the steps where people knelt, their foreheads reddened by stone. A group of silent sisters with veils like dusk passed them silently. A boy acolyte, with ears too big for his head, nearly stepped on Thoros' robe and stammered an apology that kept going even after Thoros patted his head and moved on. You mock them, Jon said, not quite accusing. I mock everything, Thoros replied, and for once he was serious. I used to think that made me free. They turned off the Septon's broad square into a street that smelled of sugar and oil. There were indeed lemon cakes, piled on trays in windows, dusted with something like winter that melted on the tongue. Thoros bought 2 and pressed one into Jon's hand. It was absurdly good. He laughed. Actually laughed, as the sweet and tart fought on his tongue. A northern boy smiles, a girl's voice said from a doorway. Jon looked up, startled. She was wearing an apron and had flour dusted on her, with brown eyes that warmed him even though they had no right to. I was told that was as rare as snow in summer. I'm not sure it's allowed, Jon said, then wished he could take it back. He wasn't clever like Robb, not easy like Theon had been. Words felt like clumsy tools. Eat, she said simply, and ducked back inside. She'll break 3 hearts and mend none, Thoros said, demolishing his cake in 2 bites. Come on, there are things you should see that don't taste like lemons. The street of steel rang with hammers. Sparks flew like angry fireflies, as smiths leaned over anvils, muscles bulging in their arms, slick with sweat. Jon slowed, drawn in by the rhythm. Lift, strike, turn, strike. He had sparred since before his voice changed. Had bled for practice and pride. But this felt like a truer kind of making. A big man with arms like tree trunks shaped a breastplate with the tenderness of a midwife. In another doorway, a narrow-faced smith worked a finer wire through a hilt guard. Hands quick and patient. A boy about Jon's age, broad, black-haired and quiet. Pumped a bellows and glanced up once briefly with eyes that took everything in and gave nothing back. Jon nearly spoke but didn't know what he wanted to say. The moment passed. The bellows wheezed. The rhythm held. Steel remembers what hands teach it, Thoros said, almost to himself. Swords and boys, and sometimes priests. Can anyone learn? Jon asked. Everyone learns, Thoros replied. Not the lesson they expect. From steel to silk, the street of silk announced itself with perfume and laughter that sounded rehearsed. Painted girls lounged at windows, chins resting in their hands and breasts propped like offerings. Jon stared at the ground with the rigid focus of a squire who has been told not to stare and is now staring so hard at not staring that he might fall over. Thoros, however, had no such restraint. Ladies, he cried, sweeping an extravagant bow that almost made him lose his balance. This is my squire. He is pure as new snow and twice as cold. Do your worst. A burst of laughter fell like beads from a broken string. A woman with a waterfall of red hair blew Jon a kiss as deftly as a pickpocket's hand. Bring him back in a year, priest. He'll have learned to melt. Her eyes, calculating yet not unkind, flicked over Jon's clothes. His posture, the way he held himself straight like a boy who knows he must not shame a stern father, even when the father isn't there. She raised an eyebrow at Thoros, or 2 years. 3. Thoros said, and for once there was something like gentleness in him. He slapped Jon's shoulder and turned them down a narrower lane. They were almost back to the Septa Square, when they heard shouting. A crowd had formed tightly around a fishmonger's stall. 2 gold cloaks stood with their boots on the splintered rail. Between them, on his knees, a man held his hands flat on a cutting board. He wasn't crying. Jon thought that was the worst part, the way his face had gone beyond expression, as if he had laid that down with his hands. Thief, someone said, stole a sardine. Second offense, another voice said, hands go for 2. Gods, Thoros muttered. Gods damn them. One of the watch raised a cleaver. Jon moved without thinking. Stop, he said, his voice cracking like a boy's. The cleaver hung in the air for a moment. Faces turned. The crowd parted grudgingly as he pushed forward, not out of respect but out of curiosity. Who is this? What will he do? The gods hid their faces. Men did not. He's hungry, Jon said, stupidly, because all he could think of was the boy at the gate and the empty weight at his belt. It was a sardine. It was property, the gold cloak said, with a face that enjoyed power in small bites. Stand back, boy. Thoros stepped in beside Jon, his hand light on Jon's elbow. We can sort this out without butchery, he said, almost cheerfully. A coin for a fish, a lesson for a man, a favor owed for the watch. Who are you? The watchman asked, annoyed at the complication. A drunk priest with the king's favor, Thoros said, and there was steel under the wine now, and a short temper when the Lord of Light sends me to a table, only to find a butcher's block. Laws? The law, the man said, but it sounded weaker. Thoros didn't pull out 2 coppers this time. He took out a silver stag and laid it on the table with a clink. The crowd inhaled. The fishmonger, eyes wide as his own wares, snatched it like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Third offense is your foot, Thoros told the kneeling man, low enough that only Jon could hear. Choose a different hunger tomorrow. The man nodded so hard. Jon thought his neck might snap. The watchman grumbled, but a coin was a coin, and the crowd's thirst for blood had been eased by the lack of violence. People dispersed with comments that tried to be angry, but turned into gossip by the time they reached the next stall. You can't do that every day, Jon said when they had walked a street away. Jon thought of Winterfell's godswood, how the leaves sometimes moved without wind, as if they listened, as if they cared. It was a sardine. Thoros snorted, then grew serious. Be careful, lad. There are men in this city who would gladly let you spend all your courage on sardines, so you have none left for sharks. Evening deepened. Bells tolled from the septon, heavy and resonant. The sunset had taken the edge off the heat, and left the city smelling more like cooking, and less like death. In a narrow courtyard, a group of mummers had set up a makeshift stage, with painted curtains. A crowd gathered. Jon and Thoros watched as a fat king with a paper crown and a tin goblet stumbled around, delighting the children. A golden-haired queen shrieked prettily. A northern lord, with a wolfskin cloak that still had a plastic tag dangling from it, solemnly declared, "Honor, honor," until he tripped over his own feet and fell into a wash barrel. Jon couldn't help but smile a little. Thoros laughed so hard, he coughed. Careful, Thoros said, wiping his eyes. If you laugh in public, the small folk will start to think you're not a Stark, and chaos will follow. They stayed long enough to watch the final bow. The fat king tossed sugared almonds to the children. One hit Jon in the chest and fell into his hand. He looked up and found the mummer playing the king, giving him a frank, measuring look, more shrewd than his costume allowed. Jon left the almond tucked in his palm until the sugar melted a bit and stuck his fingers together. On the way back up the hill, they passed a line of iron spikes set into the outer wall of the keep. Heads crowned them, most of them iron-born, with hair in ropes and beards bristling with salt. Gulls nested and squabbled on the parapet above. The sight turned Jon's stomach in a different way than the gate had. He had seen death. He had helped bury men after battle, when the air still shook with the memories. But this felt like a lesson someone wanted him to learn, every time he walked by. Cruelty, Thoros said, not unkindly, is a teacher that never retires. The city studies hard. Is it necessary? Jon asked. Thoros scratched his beard. Ask the heads if the warning was worth the flies. They climbed the last steps in silence, The keep stones glowed with the last light of day, windows burned like small suns. Jon's legs ached, and his head buzzed with noise. He couldn't silence even if he tried. Inside the outer doors, a servant with the loose look of old service offered them a tray. Wine for Thoros, water for Jon, because he was a squire, and the servant knew a squire's place by instinct or habit, or both. Jon drank, and felt the day's grit wash away from his tongue. Their room was warm with the day's trapped heat. Thoros collapsed onto his bed with a dramatic sigh of a man used to pretending to be dead for applause. "What do you think of your south?" he asked the ceiling. Jon stood at the narrow window, hands on the sill, and watched the last smear of crimson fade into the river. Lamps lit up in waves across the city, like a fallen constellation trapped by streets. Voices rose and fell. Somewhere a woman laughed. Somewhere a man shouted. Somewhere a child cried in that lost, unfixable way of kids at night. "It is too much," he finally said. "Too much of everything." "Ah," Thoros said, pleased. "You are starting to see it." "What am I seeing?" "The war in it," Thoros said. "Not men with swords. The war of hunger and money, of noise and silence, of being seen and not being seen. You can't fight a city with a blade. You have to figure out how to stand in it so it doesn't wear you like a cloak." "I am Jon Snow," he said softly, testing the name against this place. "I am from Winterfell." A warm, rank wind curled in from the river. He didn't know if the city heard him, or if it laughed. But the Red Keep held its breath for a moment, and he felt, strangely, that something had noticed him. Not the court with its painted faces, not the watch with its cudgels, not even Thoros snoring softly on the pallet, but the city itself, and he, absurdly, lifted his chin. Behind him, Thoros spoke into the edge of sleep. "The Lord of Light loves cities. Lots of tinder. Lots of smoke. Lots of places to hide flames." He yawned. "Sleep, lad. Tomorrow will teach you how not to become a story told by mummers." Jon didn't fall asleep right away. He watched until the water went dark and the lamps blurred into a steady glow. He could still taste lemon on his tongue. He could still hear bells. He could still see the heads on spikes when he closed his eyes. He pressed the stitched direwolf flat with his palm, and let the city talk until it lulled him to sleep. Somewhere below, on the street of steel, a hammer lifted and fell, as steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere above, in a tower where secrets nested like pigeons, a man in dove-gray slippers wrote a name on a scrap of parchment and smiled at it. Somewhere in between, a boy who had stolen a sardine ate the whole fish in 3 bites and didn't cry. King's Landing breathed. Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, breathed with it. Uneasy, alert, alive. And the flames in Thoros' dreams curled, showing him a wolf wrapped in light, standing on a wall of ice with a sword that burned without oil. "Too soon," Thoros muttered in his sleep, turning on his pallet, and smiled a fool's smile to keep the fear from his mouth. Jon's POV. "I had thought King's Landing would be a place of marvels, of shining spires and streets where knights and lords walked as if from the songs. Instead, the city stank of rot and piss, its alleys crowded with beggars and thieves bold enough to tug at my cloak. The Red Keep loomed above it all, grand and cruel, and within its walls I saw lords with jeweled cloaks who laughed too easily, and ladies who smiled with lips but not with eyes. Thoros drank with them, and bellowed jests. Yet even he warned me never to trust too quick. I was Ned Stark's bastard here, no more. And the South looked at me with the same coldness Lady Catelyn had in her eyes. Still, part of me could not look away because beneath the filth and splendor both, I felt the weight of something watching as if the city itself meant to test me. Morning in King's Landing did not come as gently as back in home. It roared awake like a drunken man kicking in a tavern door. The bells of the septa told the hour long before the sun had climbed high enough to warm the streets, and the city answered with 1,000 different voices. Hawkers shouting prices, carts creaking under loads of turnips or fish, pigs squealing in the butcher's lane. Jon Snow woke up in a chamber that smelled of stale rushes and the faint tang of last night's wine, because Thoros had left his wineskin draped over the windowsill instead of corked. The city's clamor reached him even here, high in the Red Keep, and it felt nothing like Winterfell's clean morning frost. He rubbed his eyes, pulled on his boots, and wondered not for the first time if he belonged here at all. Thoros was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, humming to himself as he polished his sword with an oily rag that probably belonged to the stable boy. His robe was half open, his beard full of crumbs. "Wine before breakfast?" Jon asked. "Wine for breakfast," Thoros corrected cheerfully, lifting the skin. "Keeps a man limber. Come along, lad. Time you learn something of this fine city." Jon buckled his belt. "Are we training today?" "We're training every day," Thoros said, rising with surprising steadiness, for someone who had emptied half a wineskin before dawn. "Just not always with swords. A boy who only learns steel will end up buried under it. Today you learn how to live where the steel hides behind smiles." Down the hill, the wolf pup in the den. They passed through the Red Keep's gates just after sunrise. The streets below were already clogged. Gold cloaks kept a narrow path clear for the king's retinue, but Thoros had no escort this morning, so he shoved his way down the hill like any other man. "Keep your purse close," he advised Jon without looking back. "And your mouth shut until you've listened twice." The lower streets of King's Landing were worse than Jon remembered from the day before. Narrow, crooked, choked with the smell of unwashed bodies and hot bread, with hints of perfume and horse dung fighting for dominance. Thoros seemed to know every step by heart. He led Jon into a smoky tavern, where the floor was sticky, and the benches crowded with men who looked too awake for such an early hour. Jon hesitated. "This is no place for priests?" Thoros grinned, pushing through the door. "Nonsense. Half the watch drinks here off duty, and the rest pretend not to." Inside, Jon saw them. Gold cloaks with their helms off, merchants hunched over ledgers, a pair of sellswords already arguing over dice. Thoros clapped shoulders as though greeting old brothers, tossed coins at a girl with a scarred cheek to bring wine, and motioned Jon to sit. "Look around," Thoros murmured, voice low now. "You're stark-blooded. You see what's in front of you. But here you must learn to see behind. That man there, red sash, clean boots, he's too rich to be here, unless he's buying someone's silence. And that scribe whispering to the sellsword, he'll carry the tale to whoever pays him best." Jon frowned. "Should we tell someone?" "Tell who?" "The watch that takes coin to look the other way, the king, who's drunk before breakfast." Thoros drank deeply. "Better to remember, you can't stop every crooked deal, but you can learn which ones might stab you later." A scarred gold cloak captain at the next table gave Thoros a long, cold glance. Jon met the man's eye for only a heartbeat, but something in it made his stomach tighten. The look of someone cataloging faces for later use. Street justice and first enemies. By mid-morning they crossed an alley, where a boy no older than Arya was being held by two gold cloaks. His lip was bleeding, and a hard-faced captain Jon recognized from the tavern was raising a cudgel. "Stole a crust," one guard said, when Thoros asked. "Second time this week." The captain sneered. "Who's this pup?" Thoros' hand closed like iron on Jon's sleeve. "Watch first," he murmured. Then, louder, "No need to break bones over bread, good sirs. Let me make it right." He tossed a copper coin with a flourish. "For the baker's trouble." Jon's fists clenched. He wanted to strike the man, but Thoros steered him down the alley with a grip that brooked no argument. "Lesson 1, Thoros said when they were alone. "The watch remembers faces. That Captain Rothus, they call him, will remember yours." "Good. It means we remember him too." Jon's jaw worked. "We should have stopped him." "We did," Thoros said simply. "We stopped him from breaking the boy's arm. One battle at a time, lad. If you try to fight them all with steel, you'll have no steel left when the real fight comes." The wolf learns fire. That evening, Thoros led Jon to the training yard behind the keep. The torches were lit, and the air smelled of oil and sand. A few idle squires lingered, curious to see what spectacle the mad priest would provide. "Draw your sword," Thoros said. Jon obeyed. Thoros uncorked a flask of that sharp, resinous oil Jon had seen before and drew a line down the blade. He struck flint to steel. The sword erupted in flame. Jon startled but did not drop it. Heat licked his knuckles, but it did not burn. His heart thudded, not just from fear, but something stranger. "Feel that?" Thoros asked, eyes narrowed. "Most men flinch. You don't." "It's hot," Jon admitted, "but not so bad." Thoros muttered something in Myrish that Jon couldn't follow. "A wolf pup with fire in his veins," he said at last. "Interesting." They drilled until Jon's arms ached, until sweat drenched his tunic. Thoros barked corrections, teaching him to move his feet lightly, to swing without losing balance, even with the added weight of fire. By the end, the watching squires were whispering, and one ran off to tell someone, who Jon could not guess. Lesson 2, Thoros said, as the flames guttered out. Fire isn't just for swords, it's for men. Burn bright enough, and they can't forget you, but burn careless, and you'll set yourself alight. Ned Stark's POV. I have been feeling uneasy these days, after Jon's departure from Winterfell. I have some bad feelings towards all this, so I have decided that after I finish some urgent matters and tasks, I will leave for King's Landing, as soon as I can, and I will supervise Jon's living there. Maybe I'll also bring Robb with me if I have a chance, so that Robb can also meet some people there, and can learn things that he cannot see by staying in the castle here in Winterfell. It would be a bit difficult for me to convince Catelyn to let Robb come with me, and also that I have to leave so soon after I have just come here for a few days. Only, but I have to do it, and I have to make sure that Jon's secret will not be exposed there, in Red Keep by anyway. After some days of rest and busy schedule, I have finally left north and I am heading south with few of my men for the Red Keep. It will take a long journey to reach there, and I have to hurry there. It's been some time since our departure, and we have arrived at King's Landing just tonight, and I am eager to see how my child has been doing in this city, full of lies and political rivalry. The next morning, Lord Eddard Stark arrived at the Red Keep for council business. From a balcony he looked down at the yard where Jon was cleaning Thoros' sword, his movements purposeful now, more confident than when he'd left Winterfell. Beside Ned, Cersei Barristan, Selmy stood silent. The boy shows spirit, Barristan said finally. Thoros is unorthodox. Unorthodox is one word, Ned said. Mad is another. Yet brave, Barristan replied. The lad may learn more than swordplay from him. Ned's jaw tightened. He thought of Lyanna's eyes, of promises made in blood. He had sent Jon south to shield him. Yet here he was holding swords of fire in a city full of liars. Jon looked up for just a moment, as though sensing his father's gaze. Their eyes met. Ned inclined his head, no more than that. But his heart was heavy as ice. That night Jon dreamed of Winterfell's yard covered in snow, yet lit by fire that did not melt it. A dire wolf walked through the flames unburned, eyes glowing red gold. When Jon reached for it, the wolf turned into a dragon, and the dragon into a boy who looked like Jon himself, sword blazing brighter than the sun. He woke with his heart pounding. Across the room Thoros snored, muttering something about snow and flame. The boy will do. Jon lay awake, staring at the ceiling until dawn, wondering what path he'd stepped onto, and whether he had chosen it at all, and would he survive this road full of iron and thorns and also fire. These days he is feeling something inside him stirring, like an unconed fire. It cannot be described in words, but his intuition tells him that things will be very big for him in the future. Now it is uncertain whether it will be for good or for worse. But he will try his best to remain sane in character, just like a Stark, proud, loyal to friends and his family. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the sprawling city of King's Landing. As the day transitioned into twilight, the streets began to come alive with the sounds of laughter, music, and the tantalizing aromas of roasted meats and spiced wines. Jon Snow stood at the entrance of a bustling tavern, the vibrant atmosphere pulling him in like a moth to a flame. Come on, lad. Don't just stand there like a frozen statue. Thoros of Myr called from inside, his voice booming above the den. You are in the heart of the realm now. Embrace it. Jon took a deep breath, shaking off the remnants of his apprehension. He had spent too long in the shadow of Winterfell, too long adhering to the rigid expectations of his upbringing. Here, in this lively city, he felt a strange sense of freedom. With a final glance at the setting sun, he stepped inside. Ah, the sweet scent of adventure, Thoros declared, raising his tankard high as he spotted Jon. Join me, my friend. We have much to celebrate. Jon approached the table, where Thoros had already ordered a round of drinks. The older man was animated, recounting tales of his exploits to a captivated audience. Jon settled into a chair, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It was a stark contrast to the somber halls of Winterfell, and he found himself smiling despite the weight on his shoulders. Now, where was I? Thoros said, glancing around as if searching for inspiration. Yes, the time I bested a knight in a drinking contest. A true feat, I assure you. The crowd erupted in laughter, and Jon couldn't help but chuckle along. He felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of belonging that he hadn't realized he was missing. His gaze wandered around the tavern, landing on a group of women at a nearby table. One in particular caught his eye. A young woman with fiery red hair and bright green eyes that sparkled with mischief. "Who's that?" Jon asked, nodding toward her. Thoros followed his gaze and grinned. "Ah, that's Ygritte. A fierce spirit, that one. She's known for her quick wit and even quicker tongue. Be careful, she's not one to be trifled with." Jon felt a flutter of intrigue. He had never been particularly skilled in the art of flirtation, but something about her presence drew him in. As if sensing his gaze, Ygritte turned and met his eyes, a playful smile spreading across her face. Jon quickly looked away, heat rising to his cheeks. "Don't be shy, Jon. Go say hello," Thoros encouraged, nudging him playfully. "Me? Talk to her?" Jon stammered, suddenly feeling out of his depth. "I don't know what to say." "Just be yourself, or at least try to be something close to it," Thoros said with a wink. "You've got this." Hello," he said, his voice slightly shaky. "I'm Jon." Ygritte looked up, her green eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, hello, Jon. You look like a deer caught in the headlights. Is this your first time in a tavern?" Jon swallowed hard, trying to find his footing. "I've been to taverns before, but not like this. It's lively." "Lively is one way to put it," she replied, a teasing smile on her lips. "You're not from around here, are you? I can smell the north on you." Jon chuckled nervously, grateful for her lightheartedness. "No, I'm from Winterfell, just arrived in King's Landing." "Winterfell, huh? Home of the Starks. I hear they're as cold as the north itself," she teased, leaning closer. "But you seem different, warmer maybe." Jon felt a blush creeping up his neck. "I'm just trying to find my way," he admitted, his voice softer now. "It's a lot to take in." Ygritte tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "Finding your way, are you? Well, let me give you a piece of advice. Don't lose yourself in the chaos. King's Landing has a way of swallowing people whole." "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind," Jon said, grateful for her insight. "What about you? What brings you here?" Me," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm just here for the fun and the ale. Life's too short to be serious all the time. Besides, someone has to keep the likes of Thoros in check." Jon laughed, feeling more at ease. "Good luck with that. He seems like quite a handful." "Handful is an understatement," Ygritte replied, rolling her eyes playfully. "But he's got a good heart. Just don't let him talk you into any ridiculous challenges. He loses more often than he wins." As they chatted, Jon felt a connection forming between them. Ygritte's laughter was infectious, and her easy confidence made him feel more comfortable. They shared stories, and Jon found himself opening up about his life in Winterfell, the struggles of being a Stark bastard, and his desire to prove himself. "Being a Stark means you've got a lot to live up to," Ygritte said thoughtfully. "But it also means you have the strength of your family behind you. Don't forget that. Then step out of it. You're Jon Snow, not just a Stark bastard. Make your own name," she encouraged, her voice firm. "And if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, you can tell them Ygritte said so." Jon couldn't help but smile at her fierce spirit. "I'll remember that." As the night wore on, the tavern filled with more patrons, and the atmosphere grew even more boisterous. Thoros continued to regale the crowd with his tales, and Jon found himself drawn back to Ygritte's table, where they shared more laughter and stories. "Do you want to know a secret?" Ygritte leaned in conspiratorially, her voice low. "Sure," Jon replied, intrigued. "I once convinced a group of knights that I was a noblewoman in disguise. They were so busy trying to impress me that they didn't notice I was stealing their food." She burst into laughter, and Jon couldn't help but join in. "Maybe you just need a little practice," she suggested, her eyes twinkling. "Next time I'll teach you the art of deception." Jon chuckled, feeling a sense of camaraderie with her. The more they talked, the more he realized how refreshing it was to connect with someone who didn't see him as just a Stark bastard, but as Jon Snow, a person with his own dreams and aspirations. As the night deepened, Thoros stumbled over to their table, his tankard nearly spilling as he plopped down beside Jon. "What's this? A secret meeting without me?" he exclaimed, feigning hurt. Just sharing stories, John replied, trying to suppress a grin. Stories? I hope they're good ones. Ygritte here has a knack for exaggeration, Thoros said, winking at her. Oh please, like you're one to talk, Ygritte shot back, rolling her eyes. I've heard your tales, and they're more fanciful than a bard's song. Thoros laughed heartily, raising his tankard in mock salute. Touché, but I prefer my tales with a bit of flair. It keeps the audience entertained. John watched as the two bantered back and forth, feeling a warmth in his chest. It was a stark contrast to the solemnity he often felt back home. Here, amidst the laughter and camaraderie, he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't realized he craved. As the hours passed, the tavern began to empty, the vibrant energy gradually fading into a more subdued atmosphere. John found himself sitting closer to Ygritte, their shoulders brushing against each other as they leaned in to hear one another over the din.
Are you always this charming, or am I just lucky tonight? Ygritte teased, her eyes sparkling.
John felt his heart race, a mixture of nervousness and excitement. I'm not sure I'd call myself charming, he admitted, a shy smile creeping onto his face. But I'm glad you think so. I do think so, she replied, her tone softening. There's something genuine about you, Jon Snow. It's refreshing. John felt a warmth spread through him, at her words. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Just then, Thoros returned with another round of drinks, his eyes gleaming with mischief. What's this? A moment of sincerity. I can't have that. Here's to the wild adventures yet to come. John and Ygritte raised their tankards, laughter spilling from their lips. The camaraderie felt electric, and for the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of belonging. As the night wound down, John realized that he had lost track of time. The tavern was now nearly empty, save for a few lingering patrons. He glanced at Ygritte, whose expression had shifted to one of contemplation. Do you ever think about what lies beyond the walls of this city? She asked quietly, her gaze distant. Every day, John replied, his voice sincere. I want to see the world, to make a difference. But sometimes it feels like I'm just stuck in place. Ygritte nodded, her expression thoughtful. You're not stuck, John. You're just at the beginning of your journey. Embrace it. John looked into her eyes, feeling a connection that went beyond mere attraction. What about you? What do you dream of? I dream of adventure, she said, her voice filled with passion. Of traveling to places I've only heard about, of meeting people who challenge me and inspire me. I want to live life fully, not just exist. Her words resonated deeply with John. He had spent so much time trying to fit into the mold of what others expected of him, that he had nearly forgotten what it meant to pursue his own dreams. Then let's make a pact, John said, feeling a surge of determination. Let's promise to chase our dreams, no matter what obstacles we face. Ygritte's eyes widened, and a smile broke across her face. I like that idea, a pact of adventurers. As they sealed their promise with a clink of their tankards, John felt a sense of hope blossoming within him. This was more than just a night in a tavern. It was the beginning of something new, something exciting. Let's explore together then, John said, his voice filled with conviction. I want to see the world through your eyes. Ygritte grinned, and for a moment, the noise of the tavern faded away, leaving only the two of them in their own little world. Then it settled. But be warned. Jon Snow, I'm not an easy companion. I'll challenge you at every turn. I wouldn't want it any other way, John replied, feeling a thrill of excitement at the thought of the adventures that lay ahead. As they finished their drinks, Thoros returned to their table, clearly in high spirits. What's this? A secret pact? I want in, he exclaimed, throwing an arm around both of them. Just a promise between friends, John said, smiling at Thoros. Friends, eh? Well then I'll drink to that. Thoros raised his tankard once more, and they all joined in, laughter echoing through the nearly empty tavern. As the night drew to a close, John felt a sense of warmth and belonging that he hadn't experienced in a long time. The weight of his worries seemed to lift, replaced by the thrill of possibility and the promise of new adventures. As they stepped out into the cool night air, John glanced at Ygritte, who was looking up at the stars with a sense of wonder. What are you thinking about? He asked, curious. John felt a sense of kinship with her, a shared understanding of the desire for adventure and exploration. Then let's be the ones to discover them, he said, feeling a surge of determination. Agreed, Ygritte said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. We'll make our own stories, Jon Snow. As they walked side by side through the streets of King's Landing, Jon felt a sense of hope blossoming within him. The night was filled with laughter, friendship, and the promise of new beginnings, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive. The dawn broke over King's Landing, casting a pale light through the narrow streets of the city. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the marketplace, the sounds of merchants setting up their stalls filling the air. The previous night's revelry with Thoros and Ygritte still lingered in his mind, a reminder of the warmth and camaraderie he had found amidst the chaos of the city. But as he surveyed the bustling crowd, a sense of unease crept over him. "Keep your wits about you, Jon," Thoros had warned him just hours before. "The Goldcloaks are not known for their patience, especially when they're in a foul mood." Jon adjusted the grip on his sword, feeling the weight of Thoros's words. The Goldcloaks, the city's notorious guards, were infamous for their brutality. He had heard whispers of their heavy-handed tactics, and the thought of crossing paths with them sent a chill down his spine. As he stepped deeper into the marketplace, the vibrant colors of fruits and vegetables, the enticing aromas of baked bread and roasted meats, and the chatter of the townsfolk created a lively atmosphere. But beneath it all, Jon sensed an undercurrent of tension. People exchanged worried glances, and the laughter that usually filled the air felt strained. "Deaden," a familiar voice called out, breaking through his thoughts. He turned to see Ygritte weaving her way through the crowd, her red hair catching the morning light like flames. She approached him with a smile, her eyes bright with mischief. "Good morning, Jon Snow. You look like you've seen a ghost," she teased, coming to a stop beside him. "I'm just trying to take it all in," Jon replied, forcing a smile. "It's different from Winterfell." "Different is good. You need to embrace the chaos," Ygritte said, her enthusiasm infectious. "Come on, let's explore a bit before the Goldcloaks ruin our day." Jon chuckled, grateful for her presence. "Lead the way." As they wandered through the marketplace, Ygritte pointed out various stalls, sharing stories about the vendors and their wares. Jon found himself relaxing, the tension of the morning slowly dissipating. They sampled sweet pastries and fresh fruits, laughing as they tried to guess the prices of various goods. "Look at that," Ygritte exclaimed, pointing to a stall laden with colorful fabrics. "I bet I could convince that merchant to give me a discount with a little charm." Jon raised an eyebrow. "And how would you do that?" "Simple, just a wink and a smile," she said, demonstrating with exaggerated flair. "Or perhaps a tale of woe, about a poor girl in need of new clothes." Jon laughed, shaking his head. "You're incorrigible." "Incorrigible? Perhaps, but it works," she replied, grinning. "Watch and learn." As Retreaty approached the stall, Jon stayed back, a mixture of admiration and concern swirling within him. He watched as she engaged the merchant, her charm and quick wit drawing him in. It was a sight to behold, and Jon couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. However, just as Ygritte was about to seal the deal, a commotion erupted nearby. A group of Goldcloaks, their golden armor gleaming in the sunlight, pushed through the crowd, shouting orders and brandishing their weapons. "Make way! Clear the street!" one of the guards barked, his voice harsh and commanding. Jon's heart sank. He had seen enough to know that, when the Goldcloaks arrived, trouble often followed. He instinctively moved closer to Ygritte, who had paused mid-conversation, her expression shifting from amusement to concern. "What are they doing?" she whispered, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the scene. "I don't know, but we should stick together," Jon replied, feeling a sense of foreboding. The Goldcloaks were known for their heavy-handedness, and he didn't want to find himself caught in their crosshairs. As the guards continued to push through the marketplace, Jon noticed a group of men at the far end, their faces flushed with anger. They were shouting, clearly upset about something, and Jon could see a few of them clutching makeshift weapons. "Stay close," he urged Ygritte, his instincts kicking in. "I don't like the look of this." Just then, one of the Goldcloaks turned, his eyes locking onto the group of angry men. "What's going on here?" he demanded, striding forward with an air of authority. "We're not causing trouble," one of the men shouted back, his voice rising above the din. "We're just trying to make a living." Before Jon could react, the situation escalated. The angry men surged forward, their makeshift weapons raised in defiance. The Goldcloaks responded with force, drawing their swords and brandishing them menacingly. "Jon, we need to get out of here," Ygritte urged, her voice laced with urgency. But Jon felt a surge of anger at the injustice unfolding before him. He couldn't stand by and watch as the gold cloaks bullied the townsfolk. No, we can't just leave them to fend for themselves. Are you mad? Ygritte exclaimed, grabbing his arm. You'll get yourself killed. I can't just stand by, Jon replied, shaking off her grip. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Hey, leave them alone. The gold cloaks turned their attention to Jon, their expressions shifting from surprise to disdain. And who are you to tell us what to do, bastard? One of them sneered, taking a step toward Jon. Jon's breath quickened as he faced the guard, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. I'm Jon Snow, and I won't let you hurt these people. Ygritte's eyes widened in horror. Jon, don't. With a swift motion, the gold cloak lunged at Jon. Sword raised, Jon instinctively drew his own sword, the cold steel glinting in the morning light. The clash of metal rang out as their blades met, and Jon felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him. Get back, Ygritte, he shouted, focusing on the fight ahead. He could hear the chaos around him, the shouts of the townsfolk, the clashing of swords, the cries of alarm. Jon parried the gold cloak's attack, feeling the weight of the man's strength behind each strike. He was outnumbered, but he refused to back down. The anger he felt for the injustice fueled his determination, and he fought with all his might. As the two men exchanged blows, Jon felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He had trained for this moment, and despite the odds, he was ready to stand his ground. With a swift movement, he dodged to the side, landing a blow to the gold cloak's side. The guard grunted in pain but quickly regained his footing. Swinging his sword wildly, Jon ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the blade as it sliced through the air above him. The marketplace had descended into chaos, and he could see Ygritte trying to pull people to safety, her fiery spirit shining through despite the danger. Jon, she called, her voice filled with urgency. We need to retreat. But Jon was determined. He couldn't abandon the townsfolk to the gold cloak's wrath. He fought fiercely, using every ounce of training he had received at Winterfell. He remembered his lessons with Ser Roderick and the stern teachings of his father, Eddard Stark. Honor and duty guided his actions, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Suddenly, the tide of the battle shifted. More gold cloaks arrived, their numbers swelling as they pushed back against the townsfolk. Jon's heart sank as he realized they were outmatched. He needed to find a way to turn the situation around. Ygritte, he shouted, trying to make himself heard over the chaos. We need to rally the townsfolk. They can't just stand by. She nodded, her expression fierce. Right. Let's show them we won't be pushed around. Together, they moved through the crowd, urging the townsfolk to stand up against the gold cloaks. Jon could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw a flicker of determination. They were tired of being bullied, tired of living in fear. Fight back, Jon shouted, his voice rising above the din. We can't let them control us any longer. Slowly, the townsfolk began to rally, picking up whatever makeshift weapons they could find. Brooms, pitchforks, anything they could use to defend themselves. Jon felt a surge of hope as he witnessed their resolve. But the gold cloaks were relentless. They pushed forward, their swords flashing in the sunlight as they sought to quell the uprising. Jon fought alongside the townsfolk, his heart racing as he parried blows and struck back at the guards. Stay together, he shouted, trying to maintain some semblance of order amidst the chaos. We can do this. Just as it seemed they might hold their ground, a loud horn sounded, echoing through the marketplace. The gold cloaks hesitated, glancing at one another in confusion. Jon seized the moment, rallying the townsfolk. Now, push them back, he urged, his voice filled with conviction. With a newfound sense of unity, the townsfolk surged forward, their makeshift weapons raised high. Jon fought at the front, his determination unwavering as he pressed the gold cloaks back. The tide of the battle was shifting, and for the first time, Jon felt a glimmer of victory. But just as they began to gain ground, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing man clad in the gold and black of the city watch. It was Captain Janos Slant, a man known for his ruthlessness and ambition. What is the meaning of this? Slant bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. You dare defy the gold cloaks? Jon felt a chill run down his spine. Slant's reputation preceded him, and he knew that this man would not hesitate to crush any dissent with brutal force. We're standing up for ourselves, Jon shouted back, trying to project confidence. You can't bully us any longer. Selim sneered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. You think you can challenge the authority of the crown? You'll pay for this insolence. With a wave of his hand, he signaled to the gold cloaks, and they surged forward, weapons drawn. Jon felt a surge of panic as the guards closed in on them, their numbers overwhelming. Fall back, he shouted, grabbing Ygritte's arm. We need to regroup. Over here, Ygritte called, leading him toward a narrow alleyway. They ducked into the shadows, breathing heavily as they pressed against the cool stone wall. Are you all right? Jon asked, glancing at her. I'm fine, she replied, her eyes fierce, but we can't let them win. We need to find a way to turn this around. Jon nodded, his mind racing. He couldn't let the gold cloaks intimidate the townsfolk any longer. They needed a plan, a way to rally the people and show the gold cloaks that they wouldn't be silenced. Let's find a way to get word to the others, Jon said, determination setting in. If we can rally more support, we might stand a chance. Ygritte nodded, her expression resolute. Right. We need to get to the tavern. Thoros will know what to do. Together they slipped through the alleyways, avoiding the chaos of the marketplace as they made their way toward the tavern. Jon's heart pounded in his chest, but he felt a sense of purpose guiding him. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions any longer. As they approached the tavern, the sounds of the battle faded into the background, replaced by the warmth of laughter and camaraderie. Jon pushed the door open, stepping inside to find Thoros seated at a table, a tankard in hand. Ah, there you are, Thoros exclaimed, his eyes lighting up as he spotted them. I was beginning to worry. What's all this commotion outside? Thoros, it's bad, Jon said urgently, his voice low. The gold cloaks are attacking the marketplace. We need your help to rally the townsfolk. Thoris's expression shifted to one of concern. The gold cloaks. What are they doing? They're bullying the people, just like you warned, Ygritte interjected, her voice filled with urgency. We need to show them we won't be intimidated. Thoros nodded, his demeanor shifting as he set down his tankard. All right, we'll gather the others. If we can rally enough people, we might stand a chance against the gold cloaks. Jon felt a surge of hope as Thoros stood up, determination etched on his face. Let's go, then. We need to make our voices heard. Together, they moved through the tavern, gathering a small group of allies who were willing to stand against the gold cloaks. Jon felt a sense of camaraderie building among them, a shared resolve to fight for their rights and protect their home. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Jon felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The sounds of battle echoed in the distance, but he refused to let fear take hold. They would stand together, united against the tyranny of the gold cloaks. Remember, Jon said, addressing the gathered crowd, we fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has been bullied and oppressed. We will not back down. With their spirits lifted, they made their way back to the marketplace, ready to confront the gold cloaks and reclaim their dignity. As they approached the scene, Jon felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrill of standing up for what was right coursing through him. The gold cloaks were still present, their numbers bolstered by reinforcements. But Jon could see that the townsfolk were beginning to rally, their faces set with determination. Look, Jon shouted, raising his sword high. We are not afraid. We will not be silenced any longer. The townsfolk responded with a cheer, their voices rising in unison as they surged forward, emboldened by Jon's words. The gold cloaks hesitated, their confidence wavering in the face of the united front. Charge! Thoros bellowed, leading the charge as they surged forward, weapons raised high. The clash of metal rang out as the two sides collided, a chaotic whirlwind of swords and shouts. Jon fought fiercely, his heart racing as he pushed back against the gold cloaks, determined to protect those who had rallied around him. But just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, Captain Slant reappeared, his presence looming over the battlefield. You think you can defy the crown? He roared, his voice filled with fury. You will pay for your insolence. With a wave of his hand, Slant signaled for the gold cloaks to regroup, and they pushed back against the townsfolk with renewed vigor. Jon felt the tide shifting once more, and desperation clawed at him. Hold the line, Jon shouted, rallying those around him. We can't let them take our home. As the battle raged on, Jon fought with everything he had, his determination unwavering. He could see the fear in the eyes of the townsfolk, but he also saw a flicker of hope. They were fighting for something greater than themselves, and that unity fueled their resolve. But the gold cloaks were relentless. They pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming, and Jon felt the weight of despair settling in. Just as he thought all was lost, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. He gritted. "Jon," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to regroup. We can't fight them head-on." Jon nodded, his heart racing as he made his way through the fray to reach her. "What do you suggest?" "We need to draw them away from the marketplace. If we can create a distraction, we might be able to turn the tide," she said, her eyes fierce with determination. "All right, let's do it," Jon agreed, feeling a surge of hope. Together they rallied their allies, formulating a plan to create a diversion. They would lead a small group away from the main battle, drawing the gold cloaks after them in a bid to create chaos. As they moved through the streets, Jon felt a sense of purpose guiding him. They would not back down. They would fight for their home and their people. "On my signal," Jon shouted, his heart pounding as they neared the edge of the marketplace. "We'll create a distraction and lead them away." Ygritte nodded, her eyes fierce. "Let's show them what we're made of." With a deep breath, Jon raised his sword high, signaling their allies to prepare. Now, they charged forward, shouting and brandishing their weapons as they drew the attention of the gold cloaks. The guards turned, their expressions shifting from confidence to surprise as they realized they were being lured away from the main battle. "After them," Slank shouted, his voice filled with fury as he rallied his men. "Don't let them escape." Jon felt a rush of adrenaline as they led the gold cloaks away from the marketplace, their plan working as the guards fell for the ruse. As they reached a narrow alleyway, Jon turned to face Ygritte, a wild grin on his face. "We did it," he exclaimed, feeling the thrill of victory coursing through him. But their celebration was short-lived. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind them, and Jon knew they needed to act quickly. "We have to find a way to turn this around," he said, determination setting in. "Right," Ygritte agreed, her expression serious. "Let's regroup and come up with a plan." Together they led their allies into the heart of the city, determined to find a way to rally more support and turn the tide against the gold cloaks. Jon felt a sense of purpose guiding him, a fire igniting within him as he fought for what was right. As they moved through the streets, Jon could see the fear in the eyes of the townsfolk, but he also saw a flicker of hope. They were standing together, united against the tyranny of the gold cloaks, and that unity fueled their resolve. "Together we can fight back," Jon shouted, rallying those around him. "We won't be silenced any longer." With renewed determination, they pushed forward, ready to reclaim their city and stand against the forces that sought to oppress them. The clash with the gold cloaks was far from over, but Jon felt a sense of hope blossoming within him. They would fight for their home, and they would not back down. As the dust began to settle from the chaotic clash in the marketplace, Jon Snow stood at the forefront, breathing heavily as he surveyed the scene around him. The townsfolk, emboldened by their brief victory, began to regroup, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Stay together," Jon shouted, rallying those around him. "We've pushed them back, but we can't let our guard down." Ygritte, her fiery spirit undiminished, stood beside him, her eyes scanning the area for any remaining gold cloaks. "We need to fortify our position. If they regroup, we'll be in trouble." Jon nodded, his mind racing. "Let's use the stalls as cover. We can create barriers to slow them down if they come back." He quickly organized the townsfolk, directing them to gather whatever they could find. Crates, barrels, anything that could serve as a makeshift barricade. As they worked together, Jon felt a surge of pride. The townsfolk were no longer passive victims. They were standing up for themselves, united against the oppressive force of the gold cloaks. "Jon," Ygritte called, her voice cutting through the noise. "Look!" He turned to see a group of gold cloaks approaching, their numbers bolstered by reinforcements. Panic surged through him, but he quickly quelled it. "We're ready for them," he said, steeling his resolve. The gold cloaks advanced, their swords drawn, but Jon's heart raced with determination. "Remember what we fought for," he shouted, raising his sword high. "We won't back down." As the gold cloaks charged, Jon and the townsfolk held their ground, fighting fiercely. The makeshift barricades provided some protection, allowing them to defend against the onslaught. Jon fought with everything he had, his training kicking in as he parried blows and struck back at the guards. "Push them back," Jon yelled, his voice filled with conviction. The townsfolk rallied around him, their spirits lifted by his leadership. They fought with a newfound ferocity, refusing to let the gold cloaks intimidate them any longer. With a final surge, they managed to push the gold cloaks back, forcing them to retreat. The townsfolk cheered, their voices rising in triumph as they stood together, victorious for the first time against the oppressive guards. "Now, let's make sure they don't come back," Ygritte said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We need to spread the word. This is just the beginning." Jon nodded, feeling a sense of hope blossoming within him. They had stood together and fought for their rights, and now they needed to ensure that their victory was not in vain. Meanwhile, the news of the skirmish spread quickly through King's Landing, reaching the ears of Eddard Stark. He was now meeting with Lord Janos Slent, the captain of the Gold Cloaks, discussing matters of security in the city. "Captain Slent," Eddard began, his tone serious. "I've received reports of unrest in the marketplace. What can you tell me about it?" Slant's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "My lord, there was an insurrection led by a bastard boy. Jon Snow. He incited the townsfolk against the Gold Cloaks, and it escalated into a full-blown riot." Eddard's heart sank at the mention of Jon's name. "A riot? That's serious. What happened?" Slayton smirked, clearly pleased with himself. "We were forced to retreat. The townsfolk were emboldened by the boy's actions. It was a disgrace to the authority of the crown." Before Eddard could respond, an official from the small council, Lord Petter Baelish, entered the room, sensing the tension. "What's this about a riot, Captain?" Seitan turned to Baelish, eager to report. "My lord, there was an uprising in the marketplace instigated by Jon Snow. He rallied the townsfolk against the Gold Cloaks. It's a matter that requires immediate attention." Eddard interjected, his voice firm. "Captain Slant, we need to handle this delicately. Jon is my son, and I won't have him dragged through the mud without due process." Baelish raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "This is a serious situation, Eddard. If it reaches the king's ears, it could tarnish Jon's reputation irreparably." "I understand," Eddard replied, his tone resolute, "but we must investigate the matter thoroughly before making any decisions. I will not allow my son to be scapegoated." Slant scoffed, clearly displeased. "He defied the Gold Cloaks, my lord. That is a crime in itself. He must be punished." Baelish leaned closer, a calculating look in his eyes. "Perhaps we can find a way to minimize the fallout for the boy. I'll speak to the king about the situation, but I must advise caution. The king does not take kindly to challenges to his authority." Uchtred nodded, grateful for Baelish's support. "Thank you. I trust you to handle this matter with discretion. We need to ensure that Jon's actions are understood in the context of the unrest, not as an outright rebellion." As the meeting concluded, Eddard felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The situation was far from resolved, and he knew that they would need to tread carefully. Jon's future and the future of their family depended on how they navigated the treacherous waters of King's Landing. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the bustling streets of King's Landing. Eddard Stark stood at the balcony of his modest quarters in the Red Keep, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic city below. The sounds of merchants hawking their wares mingled with the laughter of children playing in the streets. But beneath it all, Eddard felt a growing unease. He had come to King's Landing not just as a lord, but as a father figure, tasked with observing Jon Snow as he navigated this new world. Jon was changing, no longer the innocent boy who had left Winterfell. The boy who had once chased after direwolf pups and dreamt of adventures, now carried himself with a newfound sharpness, a glint in his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years. So he decided to show some affection to Kid as much as he can, without hurting anyone. And he also has to teach Jon some ways to live here, as well as warn him about the dirty politics of Red Keep. As squire to Thoros, he will face many hardships here. "Father," Jon's voice broke through Eddard's thoughts, pulling him back from the edge of his worries. Jon stepped onto the balcony, his cloak billowing slightly in the evening breeze. He looked older than his years, the weight of the city's realities pressing down on him. "Jon," Eddard replied, forcing a smile. "How was your day?" "Interesting, to say the least," Jon said, a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes. "Thoros took me to a tavern where they serve the finest ale in the realm. I even had a drink." He paused, then added with a grin, "Well, a sip? I think I might have to practice more." Eddard chuckled, though the sound felt hollow. It was good to see Jon's spirit, but it worried him too. Usse, just be careful not to take after your Uncle Benjen. That man has a way of drinking himself into trouble. Jon laughed, but Eddard noticed the flicker of something else in his eyes, an understanding of the darker side of life that had begun to settle in. I'll keep that in mind, father, but really it was enlightening. I met some interesting people, and Thoros told stories of his travels that made me feel like I was right there with him. Stories can be powerful, Eddard said, his voice turning serious. But remember, Jon, not all tales are meant to be lived. Some are best kept as stories. Jon nodded, but Eddard could see the fire in his heart. He was hungry for adventure, for knowledge, for anything that would take him beyond the walls of Winterfell. Eddard felt a pang of regret. Had sending Jon south been a mistake? Are you worried about me? Jon asked suddenly, his expression earnest. I know you are. You've been watching me closely since I arrived. Eddard sighed, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. It's not just you, Jon. It's this city, and what it does to people. It can change you in ways you might not even realize. I'm not afraid of change, Jon replied, his voice steady. I want to learn. I want to be more than just a Stark bastard hiding in the shadows. Being a Stark is not a burden, Jon. It's a responsibility, Eddard said, his heart heavy. You have a place in our family. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Jon's brow furrowed. But I feel like I need to do more. Like I need to earn my place. Thoros believes in me, and I want to make you proud too. Eddard's heart swelled with pride and sorrow. You already make me proud, Jon, just by being who you are. But I fear that the world outside these walls will take that from you. Then let it try, Jon said, a fierce determination in his voice. I won't let it change me into something I'm not. Eddard studied his son, seeing the resolve in his eyes. Just promise me you'll be careful. There are dangers in this city that you may not be prepared for. Jon nodded, but Eddard could sense the unspoken challenge in his gaze. He was ready to face whatever came his way, and Eddard couldn't help but admire that spirit, even as it terrified him. As they stood together on the balcony, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The city began to come alive with the sounds of the night laughter, music, and the clinking of tankards. It was a stark contrast to the quiet of Winterfell, where the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional howl of a direwolf. Come, let's go downstairs, Eddard said, breaking the silence. I hear there's a feast tonight. Perhaps it will lift your spirits. Jon's face lit up. A feast? With food and drink. Count me in. As they descended the stairs, Eddard felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps a night of revelry would remind Jon of the joy that still existed in the world, even amidst the shadows. But as they entered the great hall, Eddard's heart sank once more. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and the clatter of dishes, but Eddard couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He scanned the room, taking in the faces of lords and ladies, the tension lurking beneath their smiles. Father! Look! Jon exclaimed, pointing toward a table where a group of young nobles were gathered. They're playing a game. Eddard followed Jon's gaze and saw a game of knucklebones in full swing. A few of the young lords were already a few drinks in, their laughter ringing out as they cheered for one another. Jon's eyes sparkled with excitement. Let's join them, Jon urged, tugging at Eddard's sleeve. Eddard hesitated. I don't know, Jon. It might not be the best idea. But Jon was already making his way to the table, his youthful enthusiasm infectious. Eddard sighed, following him. Perhaps a little fun wouldn't hurt. After all, as they approached, Jon was greeted with open arms by the young lords, who welcomed him to their game. Eddard stood back, watching as Jon laughed and joked, his earlier worries momentarily forgotten. Come on, Lord Stark, join us, one of the boys called out, a mischievous grin plastered on his face. Let's see if you can beat us. Eddard chuckled, shaking his head. I think I'll pass. I'm not as spry as I once was. Ah, don't be a spoil sport, another boy chimed in. You're just scared we'll beat you. Jon's laughter echoed through the hall, and Eddard felt a warmth in his chest. This was the joy he had hoped for, the camaraderie and laughter that could still exist, even in a city filled with intrigue. As the game progressed, Eddard found himself relaxing, caught up in the lightheartedness of the moment. But as he watched Jon, he couldn't help but notice the way his son interacted with the other young lords. There was a spark in Jon's eyes, a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Look at him," Eddard muttered to himself. "He's becoming one of them." "Who?" a voice beside him asked. Eddard turned to see Thoros of Myr, his jovial demeanor contrasting sharply with Eddard's somber thoughts. "Jon," Eddard replied, nodding toward the table. "He's changing." Thoros followed Eddard's gaze, a knowing smile forming on his lips. "Change is inevitable, my friend. The world is a vast place, and your boy is beginning to see it for what it is." "But at what cost?" Eddard asked, his voice low. "I fear he's losing his innocence." "Ah, innocence," Thoros said, waving a hand dismissively. "What is innocence but a fleeting moment? What matters is what he becomes in its absence. Jon has the heart of a Stark, and that will guide him." Eddard sighed, unsure. "I hope you're right." As the game continued, Jon's laughter rang out, and Eddard couldn't help but smile. Perhaps he was worrying too much. Perhaps this was just a phase, a necessary step in Jon's journey to becoming a man. But as the night wore on, Eddard's unease returned. He watched as Jon engaged with the other young lords, sharing stories and jokes, but he also noticed the glances exchanged between them. They were sizing him up, testing his loyalty, and Eddard felt a protective instinct rise within him. "Jon," Eddard called out, interrupting the merriment. "Come here for a moment." Jon looked up, a mix of confusion and concern on his face. "What's wrong, father?" "Nothing is wrong," Eddard assured him, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. "I just want to speak with you." Jon approached, the laughter of the other lords fading into the background. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, you're doing well," Eddard said, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. "But I want you to remember who you are. You are a Stark, and that means something. These lords may seem friendly, but they can be ruthless." Jon's brow furrowed. "I know that, father. I'm not naive." Eddard studied Jon, searching for any signs of doubt. "Just be cautious, Jon. Loyalty is a rare commodity in this city, and it can be bought and sold in an instant." "I understand," Jon replied, his voice steady. "I'll be careful." Eddard nodded, though he still felt a lingering doubt. He wanted to believe in Jon's strength, but the world was a dangerous place, and he couldn't shake the feeling that shadows were closing in around them. As the feast continued, Eddard retreated to a quieter corner of the hall, watching as Jon rejoined the game. The laughter and cheers filled the air, but Eddard's heart remained heavy. "Your boy is strong," Thoros said, appearing beside him once more. "Stronger than you realize." Eddard sighed, rubbing his temples. "I just wish I could protect him from this world." "Protecting him is not the answer," Thoros replied, his tone serious. "He needs to learn how to navigate it. You cannot shield him from everything, Eddard. It will only make him weaker." Eddard turned to Thoros, frustration bubbling within him. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," Thoros admitted, his expression softening. "But it's necessary. Jon will find his own way, and he will need to rely on his instincts. Trust in him." Eddard nodded slowly, contemplating Thoros's words. Perhaps he was being too protective. Perhaps he needed to let Jon forge his own path, even if it meant facing challenges that Eddard wished to spare him from. As the night wore on, Eddard watched Jon with a mix of pride and apprehension. The boy was growing, changing, and while Eddard's heart ached at the thought, he also felt a flicker of hope. Jon would find his way, and perhaps he would emerge stronger for it. But as the laughter faded and the revelry began to wind down, Eddard couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in, ready to test Jon in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. "Come, join us," Jon called out, his voice bright and inviting. Eddard hesitated, but felt the warmth of Jon's smile beckoning him. With a deep breath, he stepped back into the fray, determined to support Jon as he navigated this new world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Eddard and Jon, Stark and Squire. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sun spilling its light over the city. Eddard awoke with a sense of renewed purpose, determined to explore the city with Jon and understand its intricacies. After a hearty breakfast, Eddard found Jon in the courtyard, practicing with a wooden sword. The boy moved with a grace that belied his years, and Eddard couldn't help but admire his determination. "Good morning, Jon," Eddard called, approaching with a smile. "Morning, father," Jon replied, pausing in his training. "I was just practicing. Thoros says I need to be ready for anything." "Wise words," Eddard agreed, leaning against the wall. But remember, there's more to being a Stark than just swordplay. You must also learn the art of diplomacy. Jon nodded, his expression serious. I understand, father. I want to learn everything. Eddard felt a swell of pride. Then let's explore the city together. There's much to see, and I want you to understand the world beyond these walls. They wandered through the crowded marketplace, where the vibrant colors of fruits and vegetables dazzled the eye. Eddard pointed out various vendors, explaining the significance of trade and commerce in the realm. Father, look at that. Jon exclaimed, pointing to a stall filled with exotic spices. What are those? Spices from the distant lands of Essos, Eddard replied, smiling at Jon's enthusiasm. They add flavor to food and are highly sought after. Trade is essential for the prosperity of the realm. As they continued their exploration, Eddard felt a sense of joy in sharing these experiences with Jon. They laughed, joked, and learned together, forging a bond that would withstand the trials ahead. But as they approached the Iron Throne, Eddard's heart grew heavy once more. He knew the weight of the crown and the dangers that came with it. Father, why do they call it the Iron Throne? Jon asked, his curiosity evident. Because it is made of the swords of fallen enemies, Eddard explained, his voice somber. It symbolizes the power and sacrifice that come with ruling the Seven Kingdoms. Jon's eyes widened. That's intense. Yes, it is, Eddard said, his gaze fixed on the throne. And it comes with a heavy burden. Those who seek power often lose sight of what truly matters. As they stood before the Iron Throne, Eddard felt a sense of foreboding wash over him. The political landscape was shifting, and he knew that Jon would soon be drawn into the complexities of the court. As they left the throne room, Eddard couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in. He needed to prepare Jon for the challenges ahead, to ensure that he remained true to his Stark heritage. Days turned into weeks, and Eddard continued to guide Jon through the complexities of King's Landing. They engaged in discussions about loyalty, honor, and the importance of family. Eddard shared stories of his own experiences, imparting wisdom that would serve Jon well. But as Jon grew more confident, Eddard felt the weight of his own fears. The political landscape was shifting, and the whispers of betrayal grew louder. Eddard knew that he had to protect Jon from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. One evening, as they sat together in their quarters, Eddard decided to broach the subject. Jon, I need to talk to you about something important. Jon looked up from his book, curiosity etched on his face. What is it, father? I want you to understand the importance of loyalty, Eddard began, choosing his words carefully. In this city, alliances can shift in an instant, and trust is a rare commodity. Jon nodded, his expression serious. I understand, father. I've seen how people act here. Eddard leaned forward, his gaze intense. It's crucial that you choose your friends wisely. Not everyone who smiles at you has good intentions. Eddard felt a swell of pride, but it was tempered by concern. And remember, loyalty is a two-way street. You must be willing to stand by those you care about, even when it's difficult. I will, Jon replied, his voice steady. I won't let you down. As the days passed, Eddard watched as Jon navigated the complexities of court life. He forged friendships with other young nobles, but Eddard remained vigilant, aware of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface. One afternoon, as they strolled through the gardens, Jon turned to Eddard, his expression thoughtful. Father, do you think I'll ever find love? Eddard paused, surprised by the question. Love is a complicated thing, Jon. It can bring joy, but it can also bring heartache. I know, Jon said, his voice quiet, but I want to experience it. I want to find someone who understands me. Jon nodded, but Eddard could see the longing in his eyes. I hope it's soon. I want to share my adventures with someone. As they continued their walk, Eddard couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for Jon's future. The boy was growing, changing, and while Eddard's heart ached at the thought, he also felt a flicker of hope. Jon would find his way, and perhaps he would emerge stronger for it. But as the laughter faded and the revelry began to wind down, Eddard couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in, ready to test Jon in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Weeks later, the atmosphere in King's Landing shifted once more. Rumors of unrest in the city reached Eddard's ears, and he knew that the political landscape was changing. He had to prepare Jon for the challenges ahead. One evening, as they sat in their quarters, Eddard turned to Jon. We need to talk about what's happening in the city. Jon looked up, concern etched on his face. What do you mean? Jon nodded, determination shining in his eyes. I won't let anything happen to our family. Eddard felt a surge of pride. That's the spirit, Jon. But remember, it's not just about strength, it's also about strategy. As they discussed the situation, Eddard could see Jon's mind working, processing the information. He was growing into a young man, ready to face the challenges of the world. But as the days passed, Eddard's unease grew. He could feel the storm brewing, and he knew that Jon would soon be tested in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. One night, as they prepared for bed, Eddard noticed Jon pacing the room, his brow furrowed in thought. "What's on your mind, Jon?" he asked. "I'm just thinking about everything that's happening," Jon replied, his voice heavy with concern. "I want to do something, but I don't know what." Jon nodded, but Eddard could see the frustration in his eyes. "I want to protect our family. I want to make a difference." "You will," Eddard assured him, "but you must be patient. The time will come when you can act." As they settled into bed, Eddard felt a sense of foreboding wash over him. He knew that the challenges ahead would test Jon's loyalty, courage, and strength, and as much as he wanted to protect his son, he also knew that Jon had to find his own way. One evening, as they gathered for dinner, Eddard noticed the atmosphere in the hall had shifted. The laughter and cheer had given way to hushed whispers and wary glances. "Father, what's wrong?" Jon asked, sensing the tension. "Nothing we can't handle," Eddard replied, though he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. As they ate, Eddard glanced around the table, observing the expressions of the other lords. He could see the unease etched on their faces, and he knew that the time for action was drawing near. Ned Stark, POV. These days I was informed by my men that Lannisters were plotting something against Winterfell. It also included Jon's upcoming hearing in front of King. Although these schemes won't harm anyone's life, but it would affect us economically. But I also have my own ways to protect my loved ones, and as that day was coming close, I knew that I would also have to leave for North once this ends, as I have duties to fulfill there.